Hello and welcome to Moderate Fantasy Violence, a podcast about pop culture and the world around it. I'm Nick.
I'm Alistair.
And this fortnight we're attacking the TV from different ends. As first we're covering the first 4 episodes of Star Trek Discovery Season 3, and then we are returning to The Boys, which we started a few weeks ago to see how they finished off that superhero Nazi storyline that captured our hearts so much. But before all that, Alistair, what have you been consuming in the last fortnight?
I've been watching a new show on Netflix, which you might have seen pushed to you, because I think Netflix are advertising it quite heavily. I've been watching The Queen's Gambit.
This, of course, famously is the boat which Arrow was shipwrecked on in Arrow.
Oh, really? I did not know that.
Pretty sure it has no relation to what you're talking about.
Yeah, well, that's good to know. Well, The Queen's Gambit is a chess move. Maybe there was some kind of chess reference?
I think it's probably just to do with the fact that Arrow's rich father, his surname is Queen. Anyway, sorry, carry on.
Fair enough. Well, no, we're learning things. This is the public service we provide. Education.
I'm unconvinced that this knowledge about a 10-year-old comic show is public service to anyone, but sure.
Knowledge about chess, knowledge about Arrow. But yeah, so I've been watching The Queen's Gambit, which is a show about a female chess prodigy in the 1960s, played by Anya Taylor-Joy, who you may have seen in films such as The Witch, Split, Glass, and New Mutants, which we haven't seen.
I was going to say, how many of us have really seen her in New Mutants?
I don't know, probably almost no one, because it came out at the height of the virus, where no one was going to the cinema, and the reviews were terrible, and I think we all collectively decided no one was prepared to die to see New Mutants.
No, although I am probably prepared to watch it on Disney Plus to fill space on my podcast.
But yeah, I can recommend The Queen's Gambit. It's really good. It's very tense. They make competitive chess playing a really tense and gripping experience, which, although chess is very interesting, it's not really the most visual of games. I can see why there aren't a huge numbers of films and things about chess, as much as there are about things like football or war. Things that are much more visual. But they really managed kind of build up the characters, build up the tension, so you are very invested in the chess games. And they do a good job of kind of making it accessible enough that you understand which player's winning, which player's losing, kind of what the dynamics of the game is, without having to understand the incredible complexities of people playing chess at an international standard. I must say, Anya Taylor-Joy is excellent. She's kind of the core of the whole show. She's pretty much in every scene. And yeah, I thought she was excellent. I thought she was very good in The Witch and very good in this.
A lot of the reviews I've seen of The Queen's Gambit have been very focused on the fact that Anya Taylor-Joy is amazing in it, and if nothing else, you should just go and see it because she has a lot of charisma. And to be honest, occasionally I considered giving it a go just because most of the reviews have been pretty good just for that reason.
Yeah, it's a bit different to some of the things I've been watching recently, but it does also capture the 1960s and the rivalry between US and Russian chess players, of which the Russian chess players absolutely dominating the game at that point. So yeah, that's really interesting. And yeah, the Anya Taylor-Joy character has a quite interesting backstory they kind of dig into, with her growing up in an orphanage and her sort of drug and alcohol problems and various sort of disastrous personal relationships along the way. Yeah, there's a lot of good characterization. There's a lot of interesting chess stuff. And yeah, I really recommend this. I watched most of it in one day, stayed up till about 3 a.m, just kind of watching episodes because I was very much gripped. The ending, I think, the ending's good. It kind of wraps things up a little bit too neatly, but I do like the fact that it does sort of wrap up at the end, whereas there's too many leaving things open for unnecessary sequels.
Okay, so this is definitely just a one-off miniseries then. There's not going to be The Queen's Gambit 2 introducing Rogue or something.
I have no idea. They could conceivably do a second series. I think it's based on a book. I don't know if there's more than one book, but I kind of like it as, similar to Russian Doll, I kind of really like it as a sort of self-contained story that starts and ends and has a complete arc. I don't think it really needs any more. They kind of resolved all the central conflicts, both the personal ones within the characters and the kind of chess-based conflicts kind of get resolved by the end. So I don't think it's necessary for there to be more.
This is a historical biopic rather than a piece of fiction.
It's a work of fiction.
It is a work of fiction, okay.
Yeah, it's based on a novel.
Okay, so there could be a hypothetical sequel, I guess.
I'm sure, well, they could do a Rocky-esque sequel in which this one's about the rematch.
Yeah, they could go beyond the end of the novel, just like The Handmaid's Tale did in its bad second season.
Yeah, not usually advisable when they kind of wander off from the novel into uncharted territory.
I'm sure people have done it successfully. Not being too slavish on the adaptation is sometimes good, but it wasn't good when The Handmaid's Tale did it.
No, I really like the second series of Hannah, actually, when they left the film behind and kind of went off in their own trajectory. But that's a different thing, which we reviewed in a previous episode.
Yeah, it's true. Arrow makes a lot of changes to the source text, and that was good.
So we've established that you can watch The Queen's Gambit and then you can watch Arrow afterwards.
All 8 seasons plus all 4 spin-offs, yeah.
Yeah, so that's what I've been up to recently. Nick, what have you been watching, reading?
Well, in a desire for a peaceful, happy life, and because my partner seemed a bit ground down by the ceaseless nihilism of The Boys, which we'll get to later, we've been watching some fairly lightweight, fun, disposable TV, things we've been meaning to get round to for a while, and just seemed a good time. Firstly, we've been watching Lucifer, the procedural crime show about the devil solving crimes in LA, which is a very strange TV show in concepts, but in reality it is indeed a fairly straightforward, quippy, sexual tension, mismatched duo solve crimes procedural, just like about 90% of US TV, with the addition of a load of quite camp urban fantasy stuff. Obviously there's both murder and the devil in it, but it's mostly just played for laughs, you know. The actor playing Lucifer, Tom Ellis, he doesn't quite play it for full panto, but it's very camp, it's very innuendo-y, and I think it's about the level of sort of silly, melodramatic fantasy stuff you get on Supernatural and other similar TV shows. Everyone takes this weird magic stuff seriously up to a point, because obviously it's their characters' lives, but there's always a bit of a wink and a nod as well. It's surprisingly fun. I mean, to be honest, I came into this show with the vague awareness that no one seemed that bothered about it when it started, but somewhere around season 3 it suddenly felt like a lot of people were actually quite into it. Like, I assume it's one of these things that gets good around season 2, but season 1 was pretty fun in itself, to be honest, if slightly repetitive in the way a lot of these procedurals are, so I'm excited to see if it's going to get even better now that I've started season 2.
Yeah, there seems to be quite a range of these sort of urban fantasy or sort of sci-fi twists on the procedural show. I guess maybe everyone's tired of the straight-up procedurals like Castle or CSI. Kind of reminds me a bit of iZombie, which I suppose is another twist on the procedural.
Yeah, and to be fair, we did, as I believe I reported back several times on this podcast, we did watch all of iZombie up to finishing it last year, so maybe this is just filling the iZombie-shaped space in our hearts for a supernatural-themed procedural.
I mean, I guess that, yeah, there's always capacity to watch a show that's got the procedural elements, got some sci-fi urban fantasy, and doesn't take itself too seriously and has, you know, sort of that sense of humour about it, and is kind of maybe a bit playful, which seems to be another commonality between iZombie and Lucifer.
Yeah, I mean, if anything, Lucifer's actually slightly sillier. Like, iZombie had a certain teen drama, angsty intensity, which it often drew on, whereas Lucifer really is often just quite silly and campy. But yeah, it's a lot of fun. It's very easy to watch. All the characters are, maybe likeable is the wrong word, but they're all good fun. It's one of those things where you've just got a few characters who are ridiculous, and a few characters whose main role is to just sort of roll their eyes at them. Like, there's Lucifer himself and his hench demon, who's this sort of pain-obsessed torture demon he brought with him from hell, because, you know, the gimmick is that Lucifer has left hell because he was bored of it, basically, and decided to open a nightclub in Los Angeles. And he's brought this demon with him who just lives to kill and maim, but is actually just sitting around in this bar. It's all quite strange, but also only in the sort of superficial trappings. The actual plot is very down-the-line procedural. But yeah, if you want something to really fill some time entertainingly while various topical things happen around you, then Lucifer's a good shout.
It is interesting how you can and they solve crime to the end of any show pitch, and it just becomes instantly, ooh, that's entertaining.
Yeah, I just can't remember which podcast I was listening to talking about this recently, but yeah, it's odd how the act of solving murders, you know, the ending of another human being's life, the staring into the abyss, arguably one of the most depressing topics in the world, has actually become, you know, such a standard, yeah, this will be entertaining pitch for TV. Turns out there's nothing more fun than watching someone solve a murder.
That's what we want from our light entertainment. Lots of grisly death.
Yeah, I mean, I remember when Lucifer started, it was quite a lot of jokes about how this is, you know, the ultimate form of how all TV has to have, and then they solve crimes affixed to it. Like, isn't it stupid that we're making a show in which the devil comes to Earth, which is, of course, based on a comic spinning off from The Sandman and written by podcast favourite Mike Carey, in which the devil comes to Earth and opens a nightclub and does not solve any crimes. At one point, there was a murder suspect called Mike Carey in a late season 1 episode, so he does get a shout out.
That's a good nod for hardcore fans.
Yeah, it's about the right level of smug, isn't it? He's not, you know, a major character. He's in like one episode for about half of it, but yeah, he's there. Me and my partner had a quick laugh.
Next up, this episode, we will be reviewing the beginning of the third series of Star Trek Discovery. At the end of Series 2, Commander Michael Burnham and the Discovery travelled 900 years into the future to a galaxy riven by conflict where the Federation has mysteriously disappeared. We've seen the first 4 episodes, so Nick, what did you think of the show so far?
I think what I enjoy about this show is, although I can never sure I could actually hand on my heart say it's a genuinely good, brilliant bit of TV, kind of like Lucifer, it's always sort of reliably watchable in quite an easy viewing way. In a world where everyone is trying to come up with an epic feeling multi-year mega arc, it does often seem like Discovery are just sort of dicking around a bit and settling on something that sounds fun and just running with it for a season or two, or half a season or something. Yeah, in terms of season 3 specifically, this time they're in the far-flung future, something which only sprung up in like the very last bits of season 2. And it's a fun new angle, although part of me's disappointed it isn't more weird and more sort of, holy shit, we're just beyond everything. Instead, it's just a sort of, it's a slightly shinier Star Trek future. There's some slightly more zippy tech, but it's about the same. But it's a fun way of giving the show its own sandbox to play in, and I'm interested to see if they stick to this, or if they're back in their own timeline by the end of the season. I kind of suspect it'll be the last one, because, I don't know, I suspect they'll want the show to have a sort of basis it goes back to, but I wouldn't entirely mind if it stays here, to be honest. There's such a thing as too much prequel shit. But yeah, these episodes in themselves are pretty fun. I think this show's main strength is, no matter what weird thing they've just decided to do this season or this week, the characters in this show are all pretty likeable and pretty watchable. And although they do sometimes lean into that a bit too cheesily, like, I don't know, sometimes they're a bit too keen to jump on every possible emotional we love each other moment they can possibly grab. But for the most part, they more or less land. And yeah, at this point I like all the characters enough that I'm happy to let them have it. There's maybe still a bit too much centering the entire plot around Michael Burnham in a slightly weird messianic way, but again, not enough for me to really turn on it too much. It's fine. It's fun.
Yeah, I'm enjoying the show so far. There's lots to enjoy in these first 4 episodes. Similar to especially the first series of this show, it doesn't feel particularly Star Trek. They travel to the future. There's a lot of high-octane fights in both the first and second episode. Sort of lots of chases and explosions, which, I don't know, it seems to be not really in the spirit of Star Trek of exploring the galaxy, going to new worlds, sort of encountering new life forms. It seems to have become much more of a space adventure than something about discovery, which is in the name. But I think it's a fun sci-fi show. I really, enjoy it. I find, as you say, like, each episode's entertaining. I like it. I'm not a huge Star Trek fan. I mean, I like Star Trek. I've seen most of the films, if not all of them, and watched most of the episodes of the older shows. I guess it wasn't like a seminal part of my teenage years or my upbringing. I was always more into Star Wars, really, as a teenager than into Star Trek. And I know that quite a lot of Star Trek fans aren't happy with how sort of un-Star Trek the show feels. But as someone who's not as emotionally hooked on Star Trek, I don't mind that they've just got a kind of cool space adventure show with interesting aliens and interesting intrigue and action, and the sort of the Star Trek-y vibe isn't quite there.
I'm not enough of a Star Trek expert to tell you how Star Trek this is, but I always feel like a lot of the Star Trek-iness of this is in the sort of the cuddly way that everyone just loves each other. It's not a very angsty show for the most part, although when there is angst, it rarely lasts for longer than a single scene.
That is actually, quite consistent. I think Gene Roddenberry, one of the rules he had in the original Star Trek was there was supposed to be no conflicts between the characters on the Enterprise. So there wasn't supposed to be, I mean, obviously they disagree and have arguments, but there was not supposed to be any, like, no one hates each other or no one has a vendetta against anyone. They all kind of get along, which I think the other writers of the show were quite annoyed about because it made it more difficult to write the show. But yeah, because there's supposed to be this element of everyone coming together in a sort of spirit of discovery and adventure in the original Star Trek, which, yeah, you're right, they still have that in this, especially with the kind of each episode's moment of togetherness that they kind of usually end with.
Oh yeah, I'm also a non-trekker. I'd probably be missing on some of the prequel stuff. Now that they're in the far-flung future, I'm guessing some of it will probably be continuity shout-outs. So I knew who Captain Pike was, roughly. Like, I knew he was the pre-Kirk Enterprise captain, but I've no idea about the long-standing history of, say, the Trill, the race who was in the most recent episode. It sounds like there's someone who's in other Star Trek episodes, but I don't know anything about them.
Yeah, there are some nods to continuity. I think the biggest one, as you say, has come up so far is the Trill, who are one of the main characters in Star Trek Deep Space Nine is a Trill. Jadzia Dax was the character. That is part of Star Trek lore they're drawing on. But part of the thing with this is because they've travelled 900 years into the future, things have changed and the normal bits or constructs of a Star Trek universe aren't really present. The Federation's disappeared. The plot seems to be they're searching for wherever the Federation has gone. Sort of warp drives don't really work anymore or are heavily rationed after an event called the Burn, which I suppose we'll find out about at some point. So yeah, this is very much a different setting. It's in any way, I guess, similar to Star Trek Voyager, where the ship, the Voyager, was sent to a different quadrant of the galaxy, so they don't have the usual characters, institution, races. They can draw on new stuff. And which I guess is a way to keep it interesting. I mean, I'm not a huge fan of the constantly digging up minor bits of the canon or the chronology in order to make drama out of, and I kind of prefer it when shows write new stuff that's interesting, which is what they're doing now.
Yeah, I would like to see them, as I sort of said earlier, come up with something, really new and interesting and freaky, even. In the future, what weird new shit has evolved in Star Trek's future, and they've still got, assuming they're going to stay here for a bit, an entire season to do this, because so far it's deemed fairly standard to me. They've introduced one new character who's a book played by David Ayala, who's a sort of bad boy environmentalist, I think. I mean, I guess the lead character, Michael Burnham, needs some sort of love interest, and I can't say I'm sorry Ash Tyler is gone, although I liked him fine. His story felt like it kind of ended at the end of season 1. I don't remember him doing much in the whole second season.
He was basically just there so that the Georgia character had someone to talk to in the sort of Black Ops thing that they introduced in the second series that they were both in.
Yeah, it's true. And I guess now that he's gone, it kind of feels like Giorgio doesn't actually have really anyone to talk to, so maybe that is a design flaw. I don't know. Because obviously I enjoyed the Giorgio character because she's very much the slightly cynical, scene-stealing, quippy one. She hasn't really had that much to do yet. Although there was in let's see, I think it was the second episode, they did have the one bit where they do the popular TV trope, where the characters go into a room, murder, explicitly on-camera murder a bunch of henchmen, including snapping their necks. And then have a massive moral debate about whether they should kill the lead guy because it would make it just like them.
Yeah.
I think the ship sailed, guys.
Yeah.
Look at the bodies of his friends.
Yeah, it's the weird TV morality. I mean, there's probably something how the bodyguards attacked first. So, but I think it's just the weird TV logic, weird TV morality.
Yeah, thou shalt not kill a named character.
Yeah.
But anyway, I'm sure they'll come up with something for Giorgio to do. It's just at the moment she seems like a bit of a spare part character. I mean, weren't they meant to be making a spin-off with her, a Section 31 spin-off? I was expecting her not to go to the future with them so she could stay behind and she and Ash Tyler could be in the Section 31 spin-off, but no, apparently she's here.
I thought they were doing a spin-off about Captain Pike. Is that the same spin-off or a different spin-off?
That's a different spin-off. They are honestly franchising the shit out of this. I'm not sure how much of this I'm actually going to watch because my appetite for Star Trek is not bottomless. I mean, I haven't bothered watching Picard, to be honest, because I'm not that attached to any of those characters, and the reviews were pretty lukewarm.
Yeah, Picard started well and kind of went downhill. But I guess I don't know how much this is going to happen because of the coronavirus, which is kind of seems to put a stop to everything.
Yeah, I think they're still making that Pike show. The Section 31 show has been vaguely in the offering for a few years, but never seems to actually happen. So who knows? Maybe they're waiting for Giorgio to get back from the future.
Yeah, but one of the good things also about them jumping ahead is that they can bring in aspects of the Star Trek chronology that are introduced later than the prequel timeline that the show was set in before. For example, like the Trill. I do agree with you that they have gone to the future and they could have used this as an excuse to let their imagination run wild a bit more and have a bit more interesting and unusual things. I mean, maybe they're saving it for later in the series, but it does kind of remind me a bit of Star Trek Voyager when they get sent to a new quadrant of the galaxy where they could encounter anything and anything new, interesting could happen. And I think the first series of Star Trek Voyager has several holodeck malfunction episodes, which was very much retreading old ground. I would prefer it if the writers taxed their imagination a bit more to come up with interesting future things.
Yeah, I mean, I don't know. I'm not going to completely rail them for doing the same thing they were doing before, as I didn't mind it. But so far, the future seems disappointingly similar to the previous, slightly earlier future. And I'm sure eventually the Borg will show up or something. But
yeah, that's what I'm waiting for.
Considering this show has mostly been fairly forward with the fan service, I think the Borg is one of the only major Star Trek tropey, villainy, popular things that hasn't yet been touched on, isn't it?
Well, I think listeners can write in to correct me because I'm just trying to remember Star Trek stuff from my teens. In the chronology where they haven't encountered the Borg yet, which I guess is one reason why if they skip to the future, they can introduce the Borg because it'll be after human-Borg contact.
Yeah, on my back of the envelope Star Trek knowledge, the Borg show up in Next Generation.
Yeah, and they do have to dance around the fact that they can't have the Discovery, before they travel to the future, meeting things from other Star Trek shows prior to their first contact that was initiated by the Enterprise later on in the chronology. This is the problem of doing endless prequels, is it really screws with what you can and can't do. I mean, I'm not sure if the Trill actually had been contacted.
I was going to say, I'm pretty sure I did read someone in a review remarking that technically when the Trill first appeared in Next Generation, they acted as if it was an exciting new discovery that had never been seen before.
Which is why I think in this show, Saru has to explain it with, according to the Sphere data, this information they have access to and haven't shared with the rest of Starfleet.
Oh, okay. Yeah, okay. Because, the review described it as a continuity error that Saru was aware of the Trill, but I guess if they have the magic spear data, then I guess that explains it, maybe?
I did notice them doing the kind of, what was probably one of those sort of clunky lines of dialogue that no one would ever say, kind of, as you know, according to this big repository of data that we have and no one else, but it needed to be said because of the chronology. But then again, does the Sphere know who the Borg are, if the Borg turned up? I mean, it was kind of cool when they introduced the Borg in Voyager, so...
I keep forgetting about the Sphere. It's not the most exciting of plot devices, and I don't quite know where it's going, but...
Yeah, and it's got the very uninteresting name of just the Sphere.
The Spear, yeah. Although speaking of Saru, quite enjoying him this year. Him as captain is fun.
Yeah, I like the thing that they have in this show, which I think is quite good. How the two sort of things, which is this is the first Star Trek show when the main character isn't the captain or commanding officer of whatever vessel or station is in question, and they've kind of been rotating around the captains. So the first series had Captain Lorca, second series had Captain Pike, as we discussed, and now Saru has stepped in as captain. And yeah, Doug Jones is very good in the part. They did some sort of character development with him last series, which is interesting. And yeah, now they're doing a plot line of him kind of growing as a person as he takes on the mantle of captain, which I think is working quite well.
Yeah, no, it's a very good sort of logical progression of where he's been for the last couple of years, sort of slowly growing and becoming more and more respected and more growing into himself. And yeah, it's a nice progression of it, and it's very rewarding for those of us who follow it. And yeah, it's certainly more interesting than bringing in, another random square-jawed dude. I think they've more or less covered that. So yeah, I'm interested to see if Sabu is now the captain going forward, or if we get a new one next year again. I'm sometimes a bit less convinced by the whole Michael Burnham as main character thing. She's increasingly not the most special or interesting person on the show, yet the narrative still centres around her, and everyone keeps telling us how special and interesting she is. I don't know, she's fine in herself, and Sonica Martin Green is doing a perfectly good job, but honestly, if there's an annoying part, it's less the character herself, and more the way that the plot and other characters kind of treat her, as if she's the most special person in the universe, when she's just kind of a likeable every person.
Is it another case of slightly boring protagonist syndrome in that?
It is and it isn't, but I think she's actually a more interesting character than some of the more dull ones. I'm certainly not going to complain about her as much as I did, what's his name? Tick from Lovecraft Country last episode. God, glad he's gone. But she's certainly not as annoying as him. But like you said, the gimmick is meant to be we're going to focus the show on a secondary crew member rather than the captain. We're going to get a perspective from someone who isn't as important. But also, we're going to repeatedly go on and on and on and on and on about how this character is the most important and special person on the ship. So what's really been achieved? And there's this weird dissonance where she's actually just kind of a normal, likeable person. I don't know. I find that whole dynamic slightly weird and strange, but whatever.
I mean, kind of what makes Michael an interesting character is her interpersonal relationships with kind of the other core characters. How Georgia is the evil mirror universe version of her mentor and former captain. And also in the previous series, they introduced her adopted brother, Spock. So the fact that she's related to Spock and how she's related to the other characters is kind of what makes her interesting and special. But this series doesn't have Spock in it, and this series doesn't have... Well, yeah, they still have Georgia, but there's not so much about the dynamic between Georgia and Michael Burnham in this series. So yeah, maybe they haven't quite found their footing with what they want to do with the Michael character this time around. Whereas they have found what they want to do, say, with like Saru as a character.
I think that's kind of it, really. I'm finding a lot more investments personally in the journey of basically every other major character. Well, maybe not Giorgio, because she's not really doing anything. But like Saru and Tilly and Stamets and his husband and even the new person, what's her name, Adira, has had more sort of clear journey set out. Michael Burnham's thing so far is that she's back, but she's not sure if she wants to be back, which... I don't know. Or maybe I've just watched too much TV. But this whole journey of I'm back in my role because the TV show is back on, but I feel a bit strange about it, is sometimes a little bit of a not as exciting and meaningful a journey as the writers seem to think it is.
Yeah, you're right that there is a character I think they're struggling to find, the most interesting arc for, because I think all the other characters have got at least something good or interesting going on, such as the Stamets and... in the previous series, he was wounded quite badly, and now he's going through some kind of post-traumatic stress disorder or some kind of lasting psychological effect of being wounded. And obviously that's affecting his relationships with the other core characters, his husband, the ship doctor, and Tilly, who's sort of Michael's best friend and his direct subordinate. I mean, they do kind of get across quite well this aspect of we're all living on what is a relatively small ship, and now... because they're the only Federation ship, as far as they know, left, they can't really go anywhere or see anyone else or have a break or have R&R, so they're all kind of cooped up together, and the kind of tensions are fraying. There's quite a lot of that going on, which does make for some interesting personal conflict and keeps the show kind of interesting.
Yeah, they've even given a bit more of a meaningful storyline to the pilot, Detmer, who was mostly just standing around in the previous 2 seasons. It's nice to see her get something to do. So far, it's actually quite good stuff.
Yeah, no, they're definitely developing some of the more supporting characters.
I'm interested to see if the whole whole what's going on with Detmer thing is, a storyline that's going somewhere, or if it's just that she was a bit annoyed with Stamets. It seems like it's going somewhere other than that.
Yeah, or is she suffering some kind of... It's related to how they're all kind of suffering some kind of psychological stress because of the situation they're in, which is, it's good to actually they're exploring the psychology a bit more. It's not one of those things like, we're in this really stressful situation where we've travelled to the future, everyone we know and love is dead, the Federation is gone, we're in a strange world, everything has kind of ceased to have any meaning. And yeah, that's having an effect on people, which is actually good. Whereas I know a lot of shows, I think, kind of skip that element and just jump to, and everyone's basically fine with this really stressful situation and is kind of acting professionally.
Yeah, they're making an effort to handle that. There's the usual sort of Star Trek Discovery level of, okay, this is really stressful, there's a lot of PTSD, but everyone still loves each other. It's sometimes a slightly weird fit with the cuddly vibe they clearly want everyone to have, which we've already talked about. But they are, making a good fist of it. And it has, so far, especially again on the characters who aren't Michael Burnham, been quite interestingly handled.
Yeah.
So yeah, no, I'm down for this. I know people who are slightly harder core trekkers than me seem a little less keen on this show, and fair enough, I guess. But it's not as if they don't have a choice of other Star Trek-like shows.
Yeah, I'm very much enjoying it. I want to stick with it. Yeah, I do take the criticism that from a lot of Trek fans that it doesn't feel very Star Trek. I don't really have that strong emotional connection to Star Trek, so I do feel that I'm just on board for the kind of cool spacey show with phasers and warp drives. Although I should, in the interest of balance, I have met Star Trek fans who like Discovery a lot and are basically saying the show needs to grow and move on, and we can't just have another show that's basically a rehash of Next Generation, as much as people know and love Next Generation. And, new Star Trek will not always be the same as old Star Trek. And I think also Star Trek friend of mine pointed out that I think Voyager was quite unpopular with the fans when it first launched, but now is a fan favourite. I might have to check the sources on that, but this is just what's just come across from friends who are Star Trek. So yeah, well, I've got two friends who are quite big Star Trek fans. One likes Discovery and one absolutely hates it. So maybe that's a false equivalence representing the Star Trek fan community. There's probably more disappointment than love. But anyway, for my 2 cents, I'm enjoying the fun space adventure show.
Yeah, as someone with nothing invested in Star Trek at all, same here.
Finally, this episode, we will be revisiting The Boys Series 2. We reviewed the first 4 episodes in MFV 119, and now we've come back to find out how Huey, Butcher, and the boys dealt with Homelander, Stormfront, and Vought. We've seen all of the second series, and this review will probably have spoilers right from the beginning. So flee now if you don't want to be spoiled for The Boys Season 2. This is your last warning. We're about to get down to it. Okay, so Nick, what did you make of the second series?
Yeah, well, Jesus, I've got to give him credit for wrapping everything up, I suppose, in a way that broadly satisfies everything. As I think we said in our first part, the Stormfront storyline starts off quite timely, only gets more timely. There's some properly depressing bits towards the end as they attempt to really tap into the modern world, except with superheroes, but still with weird conspiracy theories and racially tinged intolerance, which, I don't know, it's possible you could view it as slightly insensitive to do this stuff with superheroes, but it's nicely played. It's played entirely as a sort of great tragedy. The allegory they're doing is pretty clear. It's slightly strange, to be honest, that this, in many ways, slightly silly superhero show with its super Nazi did a better job of hitting current issues than a lot of major dramas. Although they did, I don't know, the inevitable ending where the Nazi Stormfront, who it turns out is not just a modern day alt-right Nazi, but a 100-year-old actual Nazi. She's exposed and then immediately rejected by society. Felt like, if anything, a bit sudden and quick. Like, although the show had done a good job of seeming quite topical and quite depressingly real about how we handle these things, it still kind of went for the, well, oh, we found out she's a Nazi. Well, never mind then, we hate her now. I don't know, I guess there's still a certain question of acceptable civility. Like, I imagine if a lot of modern day alt-right people came out tomorrow and said, not only do I have some civil racist views, I'm also an actual Nazi. Heil Hitler, here's my swastika. I imagine a lot of people would probably ditch them, so maybe that's still accurate.
Yeah, it's actually... What this show reminded me of is really interesting is, which I listened to recently, the 4th series of the podcast show Slow Burn, when they take one event in usually political recent history and dig into it in lots of detail. And the most recent series looked at the rise of David Duke, former Klansman, current neo-Nazi, a man who used to be very openly neo-Nazi, but then covered it up in order to basically run for office as a very right-wing Republican, but not a Nazi. And he was trying to hide the fact that he ran a sort of bookshop that sold various Hitler-oriented and Third Reich books. I mean, the guy was about as Nazi as he gets. And one of the things they dug up in, I think, an interview at some point with David Duke, they didn't interview him for the podcast, but they found an interview and he pretty much said that, like, you can package right-wing and far-right stuff in a kind of veneer of sensible right-wingness, but the second they label you with actual Nazi, it's over. America would accept lots of very, very right-wing things sort of in a sensible disguise, but they won't accept actual, yeah, as you say, swastikas and Sieg Heils. And what undid it for David Duke was when he got secretly or not so secretly recorded at a convention for the far right, openly talking about things like Holocaust denial and Third Reich Nazism with a journalist who was interviewing someone else that he kind of interrupted the interview. They get a bit sidetracked, but I think this relates back to the show very much in that that's the kind of difference, in that you can use very extreme right-wing language, as a lot of politicians, especially in America, do, and talk about things in sort of racial ways that we thought we'd left in the past, but obviously been resurrected. But once you cross the line into actual Third Reich Nazism, that's when people turn against you, which was kind of the key turning point in this series.
I think possibly it just happened quite quickly. Like, they did quite a good job in this show, in the first 7 episodes, of building Stormfront's effect on society in quite a slow, thoughtful, and at times quite depressing and punishing way. And then it sort of, because it wraps it up relatively quickly in the second half of the last episode, we never fully got to see, well, is that it? Does that mean the ideas she sowed into society have just gone? Does that mean everything's just been undone? Is this still happening? Will this be touched on again next season?
I mean, it is interesting how they brought in things like fake news and how a charismatic leader can whip up a populace using social media to communicate with them directly and holding big rallies for their supporters. I mean, it's not a subtle analogy, but it is very apt. And it is really kind of describes the political situation right now. As you say, probably better than a lot of shows that are trying really hard to be topical, but less, sci-fi based. But I think bringing in superheroes and supervillains and things like that is interesting because it makes it more accessible. Yeah, more people are probably going to watch The Boys than a very well-meaning drama about life in America right now. But the Boys can make these quite sophisticated points about our politics and the effect of the far right on our current politics, but in a sort of accessible way.
Yeah, and obviously, I guess the upside of The Boys is, apart from maybe the comic version of the character, they can't be accused of drawing allegories to anyone. It's a superhero.
Yeah.
I guess if you're making a conventional show about politics and actual people in suits who turn out to be covert Nazis or something, you might be accused of making an obvious comparison to Donald Trump or whoever. But Stormfront, for all that she sucks, is not obviously meant to be Donald Trump, although she is meant to be using, maybe some of his methods. But yeah, it gives you a certain amount of analogical freedom.
I think she's supposed to be based on a series of alt-right and far-right media personalities who are able to whip up a following by communicating directly with their fans, and also, by speaking directly to the people who support them and agree with what they have to say, as opposed to trying to talk to the populace. I think one of the best bits, which was in the first half of the show, and we discussed our first review, was when Stormfront points out to Homelander he's obsessed with everyone loving him, which isn't really visible anymore. She's just got a few people in the palm of her hand, and that's all she needs.
Yeah, and so, obviously, it's pretty apparent from the fact that we've talked about this a lot, and we talked about it a lot last time as well, but the Stormfront part of this season is probably the part that hit home most and works best and was most punchy and memorable.
I mean, they do sort of weave Stormfront into all the other plot lines, such as Stormfront killing Kimiko's brother and her desire for revenge, and also bringing in sort of Stormfront and Homelander sort of trying to steal Butcher's son away from Butcher's wife. It does weave all the plot lines together, and it's kind of the main sort of thread of series 2.
Well, yeah, I mean, I tend to view this show as this sort of massive wide tapestry with about 7 different things going on. But yeah, by the end of this season, it was mostly just one big story arc with Stormfront. Basically everyone was in some way reacting to what Stormfront was doing, which, as I say, made it surprisingly simple by their usual standards. But yeah, at least it let them have one clear big conclusion rather than just a Game of Thrones-esque ending where everyone has a tiny little end, but nothing big really happens.
Yeah, and as we said in our first review, Homelander is terrifying in this series and continues to be terrifying throughout. His sort of megalomania, his sort of sudden violence and anger, has obviously incredible destructive power, being a super powerful superhero, is what makes it sort of so volatile and so scary. I think a lot of it comes down to how Anthony Starr plays the character and really does build up the tension and the instability of the character, which I thought worked really well.
Yeah, again, I don't want to get into repeating ourselves too badly, but yeah, that sort of turn on a second, I'm your friend, oh no, I'm going to kill you thing is very, very nicely played and very, very scary. Although it is allegedly about The Boys. It's perhaps notable that we often spend a lot of these reviews talking about the characters who aren't actually in The Boys, because And again, that's one of the big differences in the comic, to be honest. The fact that the actors playing the superheroes get a lot more to do rather than just being slightly cardboard cutout arseholes. I mean, although, the boys have their moments, the titular boys, especially Billy Butcher, whose character sometimes can seem a bit straightforward with his silly accent and his obvious, pretty universal hatred of all superheroes. He did have a nice, driven, emotional journey in the final couple of episodes of the show, in that he got the chance to be a massive twat and didn't for once.
I mean, Carl Urban's great. He's clearly loving every minute, just playing like the big, hard British man with his slightly suspect British accent. Just gets funnier as time goes by. But he is really good, Carl Urban, and sometimes, comes across as quite menacing and sort of quite disturbed.
There's probably an interesting analogy, which, to be honest, wasn't quite as heavily present in the comics, to be drawn between Butcher and Homelander in this way that he can go in a second from, alright, yeah, I'm your mate, to, alright, yeah, do this or I'll kill your family, and looks like he entirely means it.
Yeah, they're both the sort of leaders of their group. They're probably unstable due to past trauma, prone to bouts of violence. Probably shouldn't be in the leadership positions they're in, but they were kind of stuck with them.
Well, yeah, and I mean, I guess ultimately at the end of this, there's a vague hint that Butcher might be redeemable, whereas Homelander almost definitely isn't.
Yeah.
We'll see where they go.
And I do like the relationship between Butcher and Huey. And Huey sort of went on a good arc throughout this. Again, the kind of Butcher and Huey sort of bearing the hatchet and teaming up again towards the end, which worked out well. And then at the end of the series, Huey goes and works for a congresswoman who's investigating Vought and trying to bring them down the official way with investigations and hearings rather than blowing things up as Butcher does, which is an interesting direction for the third series, taking Huey in a new direction, which is good because it was getting a bit sort of treading water that he spent 2 series just kind of knocking around with these violent sociopaths.
Well, the problem with Huey is that he's not a violent sociopath, or that he's a random every dude, and in some ways it's a bit weird that he's hanging around with this group of commandos when he has basically no applicable skills. And the comic never really dealt with this. The comic just found things for him to do, mostly involving undercover work or surveillance. But yeah, it's interesting that they've maybe decided to try and deal with the fact that Huey doesn't actually have anything to really offer the boys, other than the fact that Butcher has this kind of little brother relationship with him. Although speaking of the Congresswoman, and I really am going to spoil the final twist of the show now, so run, I guess. Spoiler phobes, although I've spoiled some lot of stuff already. Although the Congresswoman is also blowing up people's heads, so...
Yeah, she's secretly a soup.
She's secretly a soup, and it's honestly unclear if she's, secretly on side with Vought or if she's blowing up heads as part of her anti-Vought agenda. Considering she blew up the head of the person who was meant to be testifying against Vought, you've got to assume she's probably on Vaught's side, but who knows?
Yeah. But I guess they're throwing that out for the next series. Also, another note is that this Congresswoman character is clearly, obviously, supposed to be AOC, or is very similar to Alexandra Ocasio-Cortez. And I think it's interesting how quickly, a young Latino woman has become shorthand for Congresswoman. It really goes to show the impact of AOC has had on politics, considering she's been a Congresswoman for just over 2 years. In fact, officially sworn in for less than 2 years. And there was this show, and also in Space Force, there was again a character who's basically using the iconography of AOC as a shorthand for Congresswoman. So it's surprising how quickly that's happened and kind of pervaded pop culture.
Yeah, I don't know where the iconography goes in terms of the AOC analogue turning out to be a plant or murderer or villain or something. I'm not sure where that fits into the landscape of it. Does it mean she's just a Vought plant, or is it some sort of maximum nihilism? Actually, it turns out everyone's a bastard point. Who knows?
Yeah, I guess we'll find out the next series. I mean, that's all the show's own desire to have twists and revelations, especially the end of the show. It's an interesting iconographic shorthand that's kind of developed recently, and it goes to show, the sort of effect of developments in our politics. I mean, there was a long time when, a congressman... Okay, so we've got this character, he's a congressman, so he's going to be about 50, rotund, bald, with a suit, probably kind of looking like Mike Gapes. I don't know who knows that is from the UK.
No.
He's what you'd think a politician would look like. He's in his 50s and he's overweight and bald and wears a suit.
So what you're saying is that TV has leapt on the chance to have someone more photogenic as the congressperson.
Yeah, there's that, and also the fact that what jumps to mind, especially maybe amongst international audiences, when people say congressperson, they think of the most famous individual member of Congress, at least in my opinion. It's just, it's interesting how politics has shifted. I mean, there was a very long time on TV when every show that had the president had a tall, muscular black man. Well, obviously riffing on Obama, which makes kind of sense. But yeah, it was the felt that usually when the president would always be an oldish white man, whereas there was a time, obviously reflecting politics, but there's no reason why, for example, in Heroes, the president had to be black. It's the iconography of our world, of our politics, being brought in to use as an iconographic shorthand.
Before it was Obama, it was, of course, a riff on the iconography of Morgan Freeman.
Yeah, pretty much, or someone who was supposed to be a bit Clinton-like. I mean, what I thought was interesting is that Independence Day Resurgence came out just before the 2016 election. It was one of 2016's many disasters, was Independence Day Resurgence.
We sure did pick an amazing year to start our podcast.
Yeah. And in that, the president is a woman, is a white woman wearing a pantsuit. Obviously, the show was happily predicting, the next president's going to be Hillary Clinton. So we'll make our iconographic president look like Hillary Clinton. And obviously, that didn't happen.
But shows don't, maybe going off on one a bit here, I haven't seen shows really try to put a Trump-esque president on screen. They're more likely to have a phone call from the president and then the person receiving the phone call look a bit annoyed by it or look a bit depressed by it. It's yes, Mr. President. Yes, I'll send someone in to change your nappy, Mr. President. Yes. As if they want to capture the idea that there's a massive baby who is president, but they don't want to actually have to cast someone as the Trump-esque president.
No, I guess as we said before, Trump is kind of beyond satire, he has his own satire, and there's a lot of lazy Trump satire, which I think people are keen to avoid. But bringing this all back to The Boys, what I liked about, and also speaking of satire, is I kind of liked all the ways they riff on the current state of superheroes and superheroes in the media, because Vought obviously is a big media empire as well as being a sort of conspiracy factory house or whatever. But I do like how they kind of make kind of observations about things to do with media and our culture and superheroes. For example, one of the main plot arcs in this series, or one of the sort of supporting plot arcs, is Queen Maeve's character sort of coming out of the closet and being open about her sexuality, and how they weave that into the films about the superheroes within the universe, and the jokes they make about how superheroes are kind of desperate to nod towards representation of things like LGBTQ people, but without actually going there. So, for example, there's even a bit when they're shooting a film when the Queen Maeve character in the film within the TV show, going through the layers of reality, is meeting her on-screen love interest, and they're just about to kiss, and then they get interrupted by something. It's clearly riffing on how superhero shows really want to get the nods for having oh yes, we've got LGBT characters in this, and we've got other forms of representation, but they always stop just shy of it being kind of center stage or it being a main thing, just in case it alienates too many mainstream watchers or viewers.
I think the shows normally go for it, but the movies always cut away. Which obviously that was meant to be. That was Dawn of the Seven or whatever it was. An obvious riff on some film or another.
I wonder which film that could be, yeah.
Yeah. Although there was also a repeated sort of slightly cynical girls get things done joke going throughout the series about pandering superhero feminism, which I did read somewhere was one of the writers reacting angrily to the girl power scene in Avengers Endgame, which was one of the slightly cringier parts of that film.
Exactly, and also Vought is still a huge company run by Man, played by Gus from Breaking Bad, and obviously their main hot properties is still the male characters, Homelander and things like that, but obviously they're trying obviously jump on feminism as a way to kind of promote their products. Again, as we've seen Marvel do, it's straight up parody of what's going on in reality.
Yeah, I think by the end of the season we had Queen Maeve's Pride lasagna or something. It was all very stupid.
Yeah, but I do really like those little nods because they are kind of making a point about
stupid in a good way, don't get me wrong, that was not a criticism.
No, of course, but they are making a point about how far can you go with kind of corporate mega franchise and representation. Are these big American media conglomerates really on the side of making the world a better, fairer, more equal place, or are they just trying to find just a slightly different way to shift their product?
Yeah, but it's part of the Boys' general aura of cynicism. Yeah, as I've said before many times, the comic of The Boys at the time felt like a bit of a one man's angry hate letter to the superhero section of the comics industry. And in the 15-ish years since the comic came out, it's now come out with a similar message about broader superhero media, and now it feels incredibly relevant. It's almost as if we've grown towards The Boys' message of extreme superhero nihilism. So now we're finally ready. Garth Ennis was in fact a decade or so ahead of his time.
I mean, yeah, it is stunning how apt this show is. I guess if he was kind of satirizing superheroes' dominance of comic culture via the medium of the comic, and now that superheroes have become pop culture, or at least taken over in pop culture, the satire has just become more accessible and more widely relevant, which obviously now means it can be adapted to a higher profile medium such as a TV show.
Yeah, it's just become increasingly wide-ranging, relevant nihilism. Did you find this a depressing show to watch? As I say, in my household we enjoyed it fine, time, but there was definitely a firm message for can we watch something a bit less depressing once we finished it.
Yeah, it's definitely a depressing show. Everyone's kind of awful on some level, although everyone's also sort of redeemable on some level as well. But yeah, everyone's awful. It's quite bleak, especially kind of in the bits of sort of the height of Stormfront's storming the world with her thinly veiled neo-Nazi propaganda. Is very much like yes, the world both on and off screen is going rapidly to hell in a handcart. I did quite like that they were dropping the episodes once a week, so it meant you could just watch one and then had to wait a week for the next episode. This is not a show I'd want to binge.
We did binge it over the course of about 4 days. Maybe that was our mistake. Actually, yeah, that's another thing, kind of. There's a long-running trope in I mean, I've seen that a lot in superhero media, but I'm sure it's also been done a lot on TV, where a mysterious new character turns up with brainwashing powers or with, like, a strong message. Like, especially, this is quite an X-Men-y thing. A new character shows up and does a few TV addresses or makes a few big media pushes with their new anti-mutant message. And then, by what seems like about 4 pages later, the entire world is consumed with hate. And this message is now officially mainstream and there's mobs in the street. I think people used to read that sort of shit and think, this is kind of simplistic, isn't it? The public really are idiots in these superhero universes. Yeah, who's laughing now?
Yeah.
Certainly not me.
Yeah, exactly. All these things have sort of become more apt. It's how the show works, and how the show riffs on things from our world, which is one thing, what I like the most about it. I mean, we've talked before about how it also incorporates things like the Me Too movement, with the character of the Deep trying to go on a journey to rehabilitate his public image after basically being Me Too'd. And it does deal with issues like, to what degree does the Deep really want to change, or does he just want to rehabilitate his public image so he can get back to earning big money after being kicked out of the Seven? And also kind of digging into his past and revealing that, yeah, he was possibly mistreated, but is that an excuse for the way he behaved? Probably not. Has he learnt lessons? Probably not. So yeah, it's dealing with these complex issues from our world and making them accessible by digesting them through what is ostensibly supposed to be light entertainment, but is actually quite grim and heavy at times.
Yeah, the Deep storyline, he basically ended up becoming the fall guy in his own storyline. Like, he spent the whole time building this arc up, and in like the last 2 or 3 episodes, A-Train swanned in and sort of took it over and got the actual perks, and the Deep just ended up sitting there. It was, you could argue, kind of anticlimactic, but also entirely apt for the Deep and his sad fucking life.
Again, yeah, I assume that this kind of weird sort of religious cult thing that the Deep seems to have joined will become more of a part of the plot in the 3rd series.
I don't know. The AOC congresswoman did blow that guy's head up. I don't know if we'll be seeing them again.
Yeah, I mean, it's difficult to speculate at this point. There was an element of throwing out things like this, like the congresswoman, like this kind of religious cult, that are kind of more sort of background things that might or might not be picked up in the future.
Yeah, I mean, there are some aspects of this show which feel like quite sophisticated satire, and others which do feel like slightly more just cheap jabs, to be honest, like this cult, which are mostly just the excuse for the show to do jokes about Scientology and play back into the plot at the very, very end. But yeah, whatever, it was funny, and it makes sense as ever for the Deep to end up the loser in his own storyline.
Yeah, pretty much.
Another strong year, really. I'm down for this. They're making a spin-off. I don't know if I'll watch the spin-off. Reviews pending, I suppose. But I'm definitely here for the actual season 3.
Yeah, certainly. Yeah. I mean, I read a thing that this is, I think, Amazon Prime's most successful TV show. And weirdly, I think it's only about successful as kind of like a mid-range Netflix success story. But it is very, very good. And if you watch one thing on Amazon Prime, I would recommend it. You watch this.
Yeah, I mean, I assume it's succeeding for them because it looks like it costs a fortune. Okay, and that was your Moderate Fantasy Violence for this fortnight. Thank you very much for listening as usual. If you want yet more, you can go to moderatefantasyviolence.com to hear our past episodes and maybe read some nice essays by Alistair. And if you enjoy the whole experience, then please do drop us a review on whatever podcast website you're using, especially if it's iTunes. Thank you.
You can also find us on Twitter, where we are at MFV Podcast, or on Facebook by going to facebook.com/moderatefantasyviolence, or by searching for Moderate Fantasy Violence. And if you want more from me, you can find me on Twitter, where I'm at Alistair J.R. Ball, or you can visit my website, which is redtrainblog.com.
And I've been Nick Bryan. You can find more from me at nickbryan.com or at nickmb on Twitter. I believe if you're listening to this just after it comes out, it is technically the Digital Thought Bubble convention in not Harrogate. So I will be celebrating this by putting my new comic And It Snowed for sale in my online store for the first time. So if you didn't grab it on the Kickstarter, you can now do it in a straightforward online shop type setting. Thank you very much. And if you just want to come back to the next episode, then we'll be here too, covering Truth Seekers, the new paranormal sitcom comedy drama thing. I don't know, I haven't seen it yet. Starring Simon Pegg and Nick Frost on Amazon. And Blood of Zeus, a new Netflix series about, I gather, Greek mythology, blood and fucking, according to the sales pitch Alistair just gave me. So that'll be interesting. So yep, see you in 2 weeks for that. Until then, bye bye.
Goodbye.
Hello and welcome to Moderate Fantasy Violence, a podcast about pop culture and the world around it. I'm Alistair. Oh God, I'm not Alistair. That's confusing. A strong start to the morning.
Sorry, yeah.
Got out of bed too recently. Also, I just started the shit M&S coffee I found under the stairs, and it's a disaster. Anyway,
Yeah.
I know it tastes like sour mud.